Hello, I'm Fiona McArdle, and I'd like to welcome you to Shiaght Laa. Banachtan, sé Fiona McArdle mish, as befáil am goltacha siú gus a chléir seo, Shiaght Laa. Shiaght Laa is a programme in which we look at the island's rich culture and heritage. Great Laxey, the Great Laxey Wheel, the historic building's architect, John Paul Walker, explained the workings of the wheel and restarting of it. Taitashdi Keep Bladen, 100 years since the opening of the Manx Museum in Douglas. Katie King, Curator of Art and Social History, tells us more. On Friday the 21st and Saturday the 22nd of October, it's another opportunity to see the musical presentation by Cloiederyn, the Ramsey-based theatre group, about the Star of India. The iron-hulled vessel launched from Ramsey shipyard in 1863 as the Euterpe. Euterpe is a Greek muse of music and lyric poetry. After writing a dramatisation of the launch ceremony of the Euterpe for an anniversary a few years ago, which included a song as a finale, writer, producer and director of Cloiederyn, Heather Ruffino, saw an opportunity to celebrate the Euterpe, the Star of India, in a musical presentation.
I always thought there was a seed in my head, there's potential for a musical. So I thought maybe down the line. And then I approached Marilyn Cannell, who is a whiz. And we teamed up, and Marilyn's great with writing music and lyrics, and I like writing lyrics. And now it's come to fruition. So here we are with a musical version of the story of that wonderful ship. It's just been something of a pleasure to do because it just spoke a proper story for Ramsey, because it's Ramsey history, it's Manx history, as you know, it's such a famous ship, and yet it's something that Ramsey is very, very, it's Ramsey's history, and she's just a wonderful ship.
Heather Ruffino, writer, producer and director of Cloiederyn. The Star of India is the oldest iron-hulled vessel in the world which is still sea-going, and that iron hull was launched from Ramsey shipyard in 1863. Cloiederyn first presented the Star of India last weekend and will be performing it again in St Paul's Hall in Ramsey at 7:30 on Friday evening, the 21st of October. There will be a matinee at 2 o'clock on the afternoon of Saturday the 22nd, and the final performance will be at 7:30 on Saturday evening. Tickets are available from the Bridge Bookshop in Ramsey at £8.50. £4.50 concessions, but any remaining will be available at the door. Manx National Heritage have also loaned a scale model of the Star of India, which will be on display in St Paul's Hall. And if anyone has any information about who might have built that model, MNH would be delighted to hear from you. On Shiaght Laa in Shiaght Bashan Clashin McKeown Jeshachteris Victorianach, a fair de Gielshin, Hamas McKeown and Long Euterpe, Star of India, Lunage and Hockey Jeg 3 feed, as nish tan long shinna as corp yarn ek ta fos gol eracheen. McKeown Queel voor Laxey, Queel usja smooth the tail ta fos govrach, Foslit ons Hockey Jeg queg jegas died. As ish chende rish erigerid, lugan hid fez de ober, de foldo as de aie shinachai. Fe de rau queel voor Laxey, Foslet en hid Liorish Ben Woozle Isabella Hope, Ben Heja de Regera Charles Hope, Lias Chianoort Silyang Shen. Vrij eirachta shunach vanen, J. Ben Woozle Philippa Lorimer, Ben Heja de Regera John Lorimer, Lias Chianoort Egatre Tone, Vechi Arltach Goilarn, Onse Charmen as they call, de A Ojla and Wheelvoer and Chachtenshochai. After the speeches for the recent official reopening of the Great Laxey Wheel that we heard in Shiaght Laa last time, from the chairman of Manx Museum and National Trust, Jonathan Hall, the director of the Manx Museum, Connie Lovell, and Lady Philippa Lorimer, whilst Sir John and Lady Lorimer went to turn on the valves to set the water flowing again, and then went to the top platform of the wheel to see the results. The historic building's architect, John Paul Walker, who's directing the project of maintenance on Laxey Wheel, explained the workings of the wheel and gave a running commentary on the restarting of it. And here's a flavour of what he had to say.
The Laxey Wheel is actually a machine, it's a pump. It was built to pump out the mines, so as they dug the deeper mines, they had problems with flooding. So in order for them to work those deep mines, they had to pump out the water. The way they did that was by building a water wheel. This very river here that was flooding those mines, it's actually using the force of that to pump out the water, so kind of cyclical thing going on there. So what we actually have is the wheel itself is here, but then the actual mechanism turns the circular motion of the wheel into a horizontal force, which then carries on all the way down the rod ducts, that sort of viaduct, the arched structure marching up the valley. That has on top of it a rod duct, which is then going horizontally and historically attached to a T-rocker at the opposite end, which then transfers that to a vertical action, which then actuated the pumps deep down in the mines to pump out the water. Now, what is not operating at the moment, which historically was part of the whole mechanism, is the rod duct and the T-rocker at the far end. The pump has been disconnected many, many years ago, but in order to sort of mimic the force of the pump, counterweights were put on the end of the T-rocker. And what that meant was that this weight basket here and that weight at the opposite end counteracted each other. So they're almost like sort of like balanced scales, in that it didn't take a lot to rock it. So the wheel doesn't actually have to have a huge amount of force to actuate that motion. What we have at the moment with the rod duct disconnected is that in fact she's having to lift all this weight. And when we had the crane here, we actually lifted this, and it's just over 5 ton of weight on that L rocker and the empty basket. We've taken all the weights out of that basket, but it's still just over 5 ton. I'll just talk you through the operation. Obviously, she's a water wheel, so she needs water to power her. Now that's taken off, the first point that's taken off is way up the valley here. There's a sluice gate that takes the water off of the river. That then goes into a lade and comes down the side of the valley and eventually feeds into a cistern. So there's a stone tank sort of just halfway up the valley. And then that basically creates a reservoir, if you like, of water, of potential energy, of weight, which then, and because that's fractionally higher than the top of the viewing platform, which is where, well, I think we've actually got, looks like to me like the water's turned on, because you can start to see now the water. Here we go. So yeah, sorry, I'm probably distracting you from all the exciting stuff. Here we go. The wheel's starting to turn now. So this is the thing where she's having to lift this weight now. So she's working hard to lift that weight. And then you'll see now this is the point where okay, she's just kind of, she's keeping us on our toes here. She's just going to come back. So this is the counterweight now, pulling it back down. So what's happened there is a few buckets have filled up, but not enough. Each bucket, there we go. What's happened is you can see only a certain amount of buckets. Do you see then when there was a few buckets have emptied, and now there was no more water in those buckets. So that's because it just kind of has this initial thing where a few buckets fill up, gives it just enough force to start her going, but there isn't enough weight there. Each bucket is just over 60 litres, so not quite enough weight to pull it all the way over. So what's going to happen now is she'll come to rest again, and you'll get this kind of cascading of the buckets. So what she'll do is, once she comes to rest, is obviously the top bucket is the one that gets filled, but as that overfills, it then cascades down to the next bucket, and cascades and cascades. So if you stand to the side of her, like over the crane platform over there, you'd be able to see this kind of cascading going down the buckets. So you're filling more and more buckets gradually until we get enough weight to take it all the way over. Looks like she's starting to get up enough weight to have another go now. So again, we're down from that rested position, so we're pulling that counterweight up into the air. Obviously when our rocket gets almost kind of 90 degrees to the ground, it's just slightly above that, that's its top dead centre. I think we got the momentum this time. Yes, so here we go, we've gone all the way over. So now if you look, you'll get quite an acceleration. See the water kind of coming out through the, I don't know if you can hear it, I can see the water suddenly gushing out the bottom here. So she's done her first full rotation. Hopefully now, obviously there's a huge amount of inertia in her. She's a massive flywheel. So now that should keep on taking her over. So usually once she's got that once over, so there we go, we're getting that acceleration down again. Really accelerating. Down at the bottom, starting to come back up. You'll see the slowing. Now she's pulling up, 5 tons she's pulling up there. I think we've got a good healthy start now, so I think we could say that she's officially turning now. So.
The historic building architect and project leader for the first phase of works which have been carried out on the Laxey Wheel in the past 2 years, John Paul Walker. Ta taitashti vanen ons dúlish na vol red foddy slide chit de Eden Manx Museum in Ellen, an ort I jichen murti. Na holden an chasla ta regeden ons hobeg, an ach ta slaia vehe de ovracha lesha talu rish tausen de vlienten. Ta gilem taitashti vanen kurke de ahere dokmeden shandiach sliolach. As de jichen rudden ta ve fernet, as ta kiada perche onena serlien an elien. Tan trogel hin ter jit de ve taitashti vanen, shandiach nies. Trogage mer ve, mar tai lies, lesh urged, currit Jorish Henry Bloom Noble, ons enem even heja Rebecca Noble. Ren liachte en klaag ondernaach ons haki jeg she as keer feed. Och huri bes, ons jerre gauri, haki jeg hacht as keer feed. Houds van tailies heen, forslet ons main flower, se vlein shen. This Saturday, the 22nd of October, there will be a new exhibition opening at the Manx Museum. And that's entirely appropriate because what the exhibition celebrates is 100 years since the opening of the Manx Museum in Douglas. Here's Katie King, Curator of Art and Social History for Éireacht a Siúnach Bheannain, Manx National Heritage, to tell us more.
Museum 100 is our centenary exhibition, so the Manx Museum is 100 years old this year on the 2nd of November. That's our actual anniversary, and to mark this auspicious occasion, for the past 18 months we've been working on a major exhibition called Museum 100, celebrating 100 years of the Manx Museum. And it's taking place in the art gallery here at the museum, so it's a really big space. And what we really wanted to do was 2 things really: celebrate the history of the Manx Museum and how it came to be, how the Manx Museum evolved into the organisation we are now. So that's one aspect of it. But we mostly wanted to celebrate the collections that we hold in trust for the people of the Isle of Man. So it really is a kaleidoscope of objects, mostly from our stored collections, mostly items that have never been on public display before. And then there's some themes going throughout the exhibition as well, explaining what collections we hold, why we hold them, how we care for them, and to really enable visitors to see behind the scenes of some of the work we do with the collections that, as I say, we hold in trust for the people of the Isle of Man. The Manx Museum and Ancient Monument Trustees was founded in 1886, and we have been collecting as an organisation since 1886. So we're celebrating the birthday of this building, but the organisation was founded to do 2 things: to protect the cultural heritage of the Isle of Man, and to found a national museum. That was their goal, their mission. It was a Tynwald appointed a trustee body, and that was their goal. And it took almost 30 years to secure or to find a suitable location. During that time, they were gathering collections. So they were beginning to amass this fabulous collection of antiquities in the main, so a lot of archaeological items that were being excavated around about that time. The giant deer that lots of people are familiar with here, that was discovered in this time window when they were looking for a building. And what's been really fascinating when you study the history of the Manx Museum and Ancient Monument Trustees, is that they were fighting against a general consensus that the Isle of Man didn't have anything of cultural significance. They were mocked quite widely in the newspapers and in Tynwald itself, saying, oh, surely there is nothing of significance on the Isle of Man that would fill even one small room, let alone a museum. And that's what they were fighting against, this sort of attitude that people didn't understand the history of the Isle of Man. They didn't recognise that the Isle of Man was unique and distinct from the rest of the British Isles, I suppose. It was the work of men such as PMC Kermode who helped found the Isle of Man Natural History and Antiquarian Society in 1879. It was this there was a lovely description of them in the newspapers. They were called a band of tenacious patriots who were determined to tell the people of the Isle of Man that they should be proud of their history, that they do have a unique heritage, and they set themselves the mission of uncovering this history so that we could be proud. And they found some astounding things. And there was also some shocking things going on. So the Isle of Man today is, of course, very proud of its Celtic heritage and its Viking history. And I'm sure most of us are familiar with the stone crosses, those monuments we have in the landscapes that are gathered in the parish churches. Well, until the 1880s, they weren't considered anything. They were being used by farmers to prop up hedges. They were being used to fill holes in the roads. They weren't respected. A Viking treasure hoard was discovered here in Douglas. And some of the coins were sent to the tip because nobody understood or cared about the significance of the island's cultural assets. And those items were taken in the end to the British Museum because there was nowhere to store items like that on the island. And it was things like this that started to happen from the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, the discovery of the deer, that really built the momentum that we needed a museum. And eventually a temporary museum was set up in Castle Rushen. A lot of the governors of the Isle of Man were important in fighting this fight and saying, yeah, we do need our own museum. And eventually the groundswell of opinion changed quite dramatically, and then everyone was rallying for this national museum. The war interceded and delayed things a little, and then in 1921 this building that we're in today, that is now the Manx Museum, this was built originally as the first nobles' hospital on the island. It had been vacated just prior to the war because it was too small really for the purposes. And the building was lying vacant. And so the Henry Bloom Noble trustees gifted it to the Manx people. And then a year later, the museum opened. And there's a lovely speech that the governor did when he opened it, Governor Fry. And he said, from small beginnings, this museum will grow. And grow we have because we were the Manx Museum and Ancient Monument trustees. By the 1950s, our role had expanded to include the National Trust. We became the Manx Museum and National Trust, which we still are today. And then in the 80s, we took on the name Manx National Heritage, but essentially we're all the same entity. And so our branch museums have grown. Our first branch museum was at Cregneash in the 1930s, and then the Nautical Museum, and so on and so forth. So that's the story of how we've grown. And then the collections that we've got on display, we've really tried to explode the stores. So you can see some of the things we hold. We do hold over 1 million items, so it's been very difficult to make a selection. And what we really wanted to convey to people is that unlike a lot of other museums in the British Isles, we have only ever collected the history of the Isle of Man. So you're not going to find anything in our collections that don't pertain to the Isle of Man. And that was really revolutionary when we were set up. Particularly in 1922, we were doing something that no other museum in Britain was doing. We were collecting our own story, and not just the grand and the great and the beautiful. We were collecting the ordinary. So butter bowls and spinning wheels and folk culture became massively important. And it was inspired by a Scandinavian folk museum culture. And that's how the Manx Folklife Survey was started as well. It was about collecting the voices of the Manx people, collecting the Manx language, making sure that the traditions of our way of life were kept. And ultimately, that dream of the early curators of the museum, that dream turned into Craignish, the first folk museum, the first open-air folk museum to open in the British Isles. The museum has expanded in various ways in that it very much took the footprint of the original Nobles Hospital originally, and then in the 1930s, under curator or director, as he was then, William Cubban, and his assistant, Basil McGaw, there was quite a lot of investment from Tynwald to reshape the galleries, to enlarge the museum. And that involved things like covering over the courtyards that were here when it was the hospital to get more floor space. And then in the 60s, there was big developments with the library stack and archive building being constructed, which you can see from the Seawood side. It's like a huge grey building. And then, of course, in the 1980s, we had the art gallery and teaching spaces added as well. So the building has grown, and the organisation has grown from one museum to 12 sites that we operate on behalf of the people of the Isle of Man. So it's a year-long run, so it's going to run through to October next year, and we've got lots of things planned throughout the year to celebrate the collections and the stories they hold. Yes, we hold collections in trust for people of the Isle of Man, but it's not just about old stuff, it's about the stories that go with them. So one of my favourite objects in the exhibition is a very old, battered-looking chair, and if you saw the chair, you'd probably think, oh, that's an old broken chair. And it's when the story of the chair is revealed. So we don't just collect things that you found in your attic and you don't know what it is, or we don't just collect something that someone might have thrown in the skip. That's not what we do. We collect objects with stories, with meaning. And we're quite selective in what we acquire, because obviously we can't just collect everything. So that's our social history collections. But of course, we've also got archaeological collections, natural history specimens, art, clothing and textiles as well, and libraries and archives, which take up a huge amount of our overall holdings. So it's essentially about the stories that we hold, and every object fits somewhere in the jigsaw of the island's story. And that was really revolutionary when what they were doing in the 1920s and the 1930s, this collecting the ordinary. And two of the trailblazers of this were director William Cubban and his assistant, who then went on to become director, Basil McGaw. And in 1939, Basil McGaw reflected in a public lecture about why they were doing it and how it wasn't seen as very glamorous because, it wasn't a, fantastic painting or a piece of wonderful archaeology. It was ordinary things. And Basil McGaw said, "It is strange how seldom the things of daily life attract the attention of scholars. And we resolved on a campaign of fieldwork in the country on the principle that we would not obtain what we required unless we went out to look for it." So that's the heart of the Manx Folklife Survey, which is so important to our national story today. They had a team of volunteers that would go out into the country and they'd sleep in the haylofts of people's homes or in their farms to make sure that they could gather these stories. And when they were gathering the stories, often in notebook form, they would be gifted a spinning wheel or the chair that I referred to earlier. So they were gathering the artefacts of the people, and within 20 years, a lot of that would have been lost and gone. So it was very important what they were doing, and we've got a fantastic legacy here from that period.
Katie King, MNH's Curator of Art and Social History, and the exhibition called Tai Tash Di Keed Bladen, opening this Saturday, the 22nd of October, ready for the anniversary of the opening of that iconic building as the Manx Museum on the 2nd of November 1922. The exhibition will be running until early October next year. Chenave or Shiaght Laa and Shiaght Show. That's all from Shiaght Laa this time. Shiaght Laa will be back next Thursday evening. But now from me, Fiona McArdle, same you.